everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt, a podcast about electric vehicles, renewable energy, autonomous driving, and much, much more. My name is Bodhi, and I am your host. And on today's episode, we are going to talk about autonomous driving and a little bit more. Not much, much more, just a little bit more. It's been about 2 weeks now, or almost 2 weeks, since we covered Tesla's WeRobot event. And, you know, a lot of criticism that Tesla got for the WeRobot event is that it didn't include a lot of information. Like Tesla had this, or Elon, portrayed this grand vision for the CyberCab robo-taxi service, but was really light on the details on how they were going to actually accomplish this. So I thought it would be a good idea to take an episode and actually fill in those gaps. But before we do that, I would like to welcome a new patron, Brian. Brian went to patreon.com/kilowatt, or he might have went to supportkilowatt.com and signed up to become a patron. Brian, thank you so much for supporting the show. I really appreciate it. It really does mean a lot, and it really helps. So again, I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you for doing that. It really does mean a lot. So thank you. If you need any assistance setting up your RSS feed, or if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me. Of course, my email is bodie, BODIE, at 918digital.com. All right, let's move on to our news. Now, I do have to let you know that a normal 20-minute show, is about 4 pages of notes for me. Today's show is 10 pages of notes. This took me a very long time to not only go through all the articles that I needed to go through and find, the things that were important, but also to write it up. I had to reorganize it a couple of times. Like there's going to be a lot of information in this episode. So hopefully you find this episode useful. What I thought we would do is we'd start with some of the lighter stuff. So let's start off with CyberCab and wireless charging. One of the things that I found interesting was that the wireless charger for the vehicle is in the back of the vehicle, not in the front. So in order to charge your vehicle, you need to drive over the pad or back onto the pad to charge your vehicle. And I thought, well, that's just really interesting the way Tesla does that. I wonder why that is, because if you're charging in your garage, right, you normally drive, forward into your garage, and you would probably want the charger to be near the front of the garage. I would think that would be my thought. But if, Tesla brings wireless charging to other vehicles, it looks like it's going to need to be in the rear of the vehicle. So I thought that was interesting, or at least for the Cybertruck, or the CyberCab, it's going to need to be in the rear. But then I thought, well, one of my favorite features is Tesla's auto park. So if you don't know, if you have full self-driving, I don't, but I did get granted another trial. So I've been playing with it over the last couple of days. But anyway, if you don't know what auto park is, when you're driving through a parking lot, you'll actually see on the screen the parking spaces, and then it's got a little P, and you choose which parking space you want, and the car will park itself. It'll actually back into that parking space, and it works really well. To be honest, it's one of my favorite features of full self-driving, and I genuinely would pay, $100 or $200 to use this thing all the time, just have access to it whenever without full self-driving. But when you consider the CyberCab needs to back into a space in order to charge, over this charging pad, the auto park feature makes a lot of sense when it does that. Like, it just doesn't nose into the parking spot. It actually backs into the parking spot. So maybe this isn't groundbreaking to everybody else, but I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Again, I could be the last person figuring this out, so I might sound really foolish right now, but anyway, there you go. The next little bit about CyberCab and wireless charging is Marques Brownlee made a little video. Well, not a little video. His videos are always huge, but he made a video talking about the inefficiencies when it comes to wireless charging and vehicles, and he hypothesized that Tesla's probably getting somewhere around 75% efficiency with their wireless charging system, which is to say, to make this really easy, say the max they could get is 10 kilowatts, and with the 75% efficiency, that would drop it down to 7.5 kilowatts. Tesla did respond to his video and claimed that their efficiency on their wireless charger is well over 90%. Now, the proof is in the pudding. Once these actually come out and are deployed in the world, we'll see if that's really true or if that only works in Tesla's test labs. But 90% is a pretty good number, so we shall see. All right, let's move on to RoboVan. Franz von Holzhausen, if you don't know, he is Tesla's lead designer. He was on the Kilowatts podcast, not this podcast, the Kilowatts podcast. And he was interviewed at the WeRobot event, and they were actually in the RoboVan, which is pretty cool. And the host Ryan asked if the RoboVan could fit into a boring tunnel. And Franz kind of smiled. His eyes lit up, and he smiled, and he said, possibly. And almost certainly it would, if you're trying to move people in a significant way around places like that are really congested, like LA, and you happen to have access to a tunnel, why wouldn't you do this? It makes a lot of sense. I did watch the entire interview, and I'm going to be honest with you, it was not great. And let me be clear on this. It was not the fault of host Ryan Levinson. It was not his fault. He did fine. It was just Franz did not give any more information that was significant. It was surface level only. And Ryan even, talks about the event and how there wasn't much information a little bit later. But if you want to go back and watch it, I'll put a link in the show notes. And, even though our names are similar, I have zero animosity towards Ryan and what he does. I think what he does is great. So go watch his YouTube channel. All right. Elon posted a picture of RoboVan on X with the caption saying, "Futuristic Art Deco bus." He then later confirmed that the RoboVan's design inspiration was taken from Art Deco trains. And if you look up on Google trains from the 1930s, that makes sense to me. That jives. I don't know if it's true. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it makes total sense that it does kind of have that look and feel. I guess that leads us to a few people in the movie industry that are unhappy with Tesla's event. Producers of Blade Runner 2049 are not happy with Tesla and Elon for using Blade Runner-inspired visualizations at the WeRobot event. It does sound like Tesla asked permission to use some Blade Runner-inspired visuals, and they were denied. And Tesla did it anyway. And the producers are claiming that Tesla used AI-generated images that were nearly identical to images from the film. So the producers are suing Tesla and Elon. I'm not sure if they'll win. It'll be a while before we find out if this goes anywhere or becomes a big deal. But yeah, I haven't seen the new Blade Runner, but I did see the original way back when. And I always thought it was weird that Elon wants to model, and he's said this in the past, like his vehicles off of these, movies that have a very bleak outlook for our future. Now, I will grant you that there was cool technology in that world, but it wasn't exactly a utopia. It was kind of sad, and there was a lot of problems. Why would we want to manifest that in our real life? I'm not really sure. Now, speaking of sci-fi movies, WeRobot is clearly a reference to the movie I, Robot. And, if you did a side-by-side comparison of the Optimus robots with the iRobot robots, the RoboVan with the transport van in iRobot, I have seen that movie. And even the CyberCab looks kind of like the Audis. I think it was Audis that Will Smith was driving in that movie. There's a lot of design cues that seem like they're taken from that movie. Even like we said, the RoboVan is like this, inspiration from design came from the Art Deco trains. But if you look at them side by side, it looks like it also maybe came from some of that inspiration came from iRobot. Um, I don't think the iRobot people are going to do anything about this, but they are calling out the similarities, and a lot of people are as well. And there's a lot of funny memes that also call out the similarities because if you've seen the movie, great. If you haven't, the robots you go off script and start hurting people. Uh, the movie's old. If that's too much of a spoiler for you, don't email me. It's old. And then that brings us to the Optimus robots. I mentioned that the Optimus robots were serving drinks and handing out gifts and, walking among the meat bags in the crowd. Um, as a matter of fact, each Optimus bot had its own meat bag assistant that made sure that nobody abused the Optimus bot, which is good. But there may have been another purpose there as well, because each meat bag minder had a device in their hand that allowed the minder to interact with the Optimus bot in some way. We don't know exactly what it was doing, but they had some device in their hand and they were clicking buttons. So not sure if everything was totally AI, I think, like Elon was leading us to believe. Now, I don't believe that he specifically said that it was 100% AI. The robots were interacting this way. Some people were able to have conversations with Optimus, and a lot of people were impressed with the conversations. Like one person asked about their shoes, and the Optimus made a joke about it was just their feet. I don't know if this was real. It did not seem like it was real to me, but I don't know. So I'm just going to quote somebody who probably does know. Adam Jonas of Morgan Stanley said, "It is our understanding that these robots were not operating entirely autonomously, but relied on teleops, human intervention, so it was more of a demonstration of degrees of freedom and agility." So my question to you is, do you think that there was some human intervention when it came to the Optimus robots? Honestly, Elon has been known to exaggerate FSD capabilities in the past and got caught, editing videos to make it seem as if FSD worked better than it did at the time. Do you think there was some human interaction going on with these Optimus robots? Send me an email, Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. And here's another question, because Tesla had a disclaimer about forward-looking statements at that time. Do you think that if Tesla did lie about anything, or knowingly lie about anything at the event, do you think that violates any sort of SEC rules? So, yeah, send me an email, Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. All right, so we're done with that section. Let's talk about full self-driving, supervised and unsupervised, and robo-taxi. And let's start off with the basics, right? Right now, Tesla in regulatory filings has said that full self-driving is level 2. So that's where we are at the moment as of today. We have access to. They use Tesla Vision so that it's only cameras instead of using radar, lidar, ultrasonic sensors, and cameras. Tesla only uses cameras. They turned off the ultrasonic sensors and the radars on the cars that had them, and they stopped including them, on other cars when they made that change. Now, armed with that knowledge, let's go ahead and talk about some things related to robotaxi and full self-driving. We're going to talk about it a little bit from an investor's perspective, from the journalist perspective, and then kind of from regulators' perspectives on what they need to prove in order to, be granted the ability to operate a robotaxi, even if it's just for testing. and then maybe some challenges that they're going to have. So let's start off with the investors. After the event, the next day on Friday, the 11th, Tesla's stock took a 9% hit. So Elon lost $15 billion in net worth, which is a massive loss for most people, but he is still the richest man with an updated net worth of $240 billion. And I should say richest man tracked. It's kind of thought that Vladimir Putin was probably the richest man in the world, and maybe some of the other folks that maybe don't have their money tracked quite as closely as other folks do. Let's just say that way. But richest man on record, Elon Musk. Some of the reasons given for the dip in stock price is Tesla's lack of detail. They didn't really share a plan on how all of this was going to come together. And then there was some skepticism when it comes to Tesla's timeline. Last episode, we talked about, Tesla's departures, but we also talked about some people who got promoted at Tesla, right? And there was some talk right before the event of having newly promoted Tesla VPs Milan Kovic and Ashok Alaswamy speak at the event and provide much needed details. And it's just reported that Elon said no, because Elon wanted to keep the presentation at a high level because he knew that competitors watched Tesla so closely. There also is some people out there saying that this was another way for Tesla to, just raise capital. Tesla doesn't need capital that bad, so I don't think that was the case in with the event. But I'll also say that, if you're worried that competitors are going to copy you, those competitors already have a bunch of stuff in motion. They're probably not talking about it like you are, but they already have a bunch of stuff in motion. A lot of the stuff that they're working on relies on technologies like LiDAR and radar and ultrasonic sensors and cameras and things that you're doing differently. So yes, could they have stolen some stuff or gotten some inspiration, let's say, from the WeRobot presentation? Absolutely. It might get them to move in a specific direction, but it probably wouldn't be done in a very timely manner, and they'd have to abandon a bunch of things that they've already been working on. So I can see Elon's point in that we don't want to give too much away. However, the people working in this field, in the autonomous driving field, and they already know a lot of this stuff. I genuinely don't think that anything that Tesla's working on would be considered surprising to any of these engineers and researchers that are working in the area of autonomous driving. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Tesla's doing something in such a unique way that it takes them by surprise. But also, FYI, a lot of the Tesla engineers that worked on some of this stuff are now working other places. So it's not as if, they're going to give up Tesla's secret sauce, but they come with knowledge, and maybe they don't do it exactly the way Tesla does it, but they can do something similar that is adjacent to this. What I'm saying is Tesla probably could have given a lot more detail without giving away the store, right? I think the argument that we're going to keep this real simple so that our competitors don't get any ideas, I don't think that's a great argument, because these folks already know. Whatever you're going to tell them that is going to sound new and amazing to bozos like me is going to be old hat to people who actually research this stuff and work in this space. So I think that's a cop out, to be honest with you. But I am sure we're going to hear more on all of this when it comes to Tesla's earnings call, which is actually tomorrow as I record this. Again, I wanted to get this episode out way sooner than I have. It's just it was a big episode to write, so forgive me. Let's see here. Let's move on to journalists, because Investors are interesting, right? And what the stock price does is interesting, but it's not something we really cover here on our show. But we do, get our news from journalists. So let's start with that. From the articles that I've read, and I try to get my information from a variety of different news outlets. There's a lot of skepticism that Tesla will be able to accomplish their robo-taxi goal in the time frame that Elon laid out. And we're going to go over all the reasons why here in a moment. But I will say that this is based on the journalists', professional opinions. It's based on where we are currently with full self-driving. It's based on Elon's inability uh, to deliver in a timely manner on certain promises. Like, I think Elon delivers more than people give him credit for, but it's always very late. And then it's based on like current laws and regulations. And again, we're going to get into that. So I just want to make that very clear before we actually start talking about this stuff. So that's what we're basing this off of is opinions. There's some experts that the journalist interviewed that will be in here. It's their opinion as well. So none of this is set in stone. There's a presidential election coming up that could change the way that this works for the positive for Tesla and Elon, and for maybe a negative. Who knows? So what I'm saying is this information comes with some caveats. All right. Let's start with, is full self-driving ready for CyberCab? And the short answer to that is no. But we're going to start with a quote from Ars Technica. Tesla's controversial full self-driving is now capable of some quite advanced driving, but can breed undeserved complacency according to independent testing. The partially automated driving system exhibited dangerous behavior that required human intervention more than 75 times over the course of more than 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers of driving in Southern California, averaging one intervention every 13 miles. So we actually talked about this, if this sounds familiar. A couple of weeks ago, AMCI did some testing, and this quote was based off of their testing. The disengagements could be something silly that the system should know how to do or how to handle, or it could be an edge case. And the edge cases, are harder to deal with when it comes to autonomous driving systems. And I'm hoping to get a representative from AMCI on the show. I'm actually kind of trying to work that out right now. So I'll keep you posted on that as we kind of go through the process. But we also have Fred Lambert, who did his own testing. Fred Lambert is of Electric. I should let you know that Fred Lambert is, I don't want to say he's not a fan of Tesla, but he's been very critical of Tesla. I happen to agree with a lot of things that he says. I don't agree with everything that he says, but I think he is fair when it comes to Tesla. But Tesla, or Elon specifically, I'm not really sure. Not a fan of his takes for sure. So Fred recently took a 200-mile or 350-kilometer trip, and he used FSD 12.5.4.2 nearly the entire trip. Like I said, I think Fred is fair. He had some good things to say about FSD and some bad things. I'm going to start with the bad things, and I will say that Fred lives in Canada, and I'm not familiar with, he gave the cities, but I'm not familiar with the road trip that he's taking. If someone was like, I'm going from LA to Vegas, I'm very familiar with that trip. I'm familiar with Boise, Idaho to Seattle, Washington. I've done those trips tons of times. I have no idea what he encountered on his trip through Canada, right? Through the 200 miles or 350 kilometers that he took. So I am going off of his article alone. I do not know how congested the roads are, what type of roads he was on, for long periods of time. Just putting that out there. So we'll start with the bad, and we'll start with the kind of the minor bad. There was a large amount of interventions. Now, an intervention is not a full disengagement, but the driver needs to interact with the system in some way or another. One of the examples he gave was passing a slower car. So it's a 2-lane road. You're let's say we're going east. You got somebody slow in front of you. The car passes on the left and then doesn't move back into the right lane after making that pass, right? This is a very specific example, and I'm not entirely sure if there's some sort of Canadian, rule that or law that means you can only travel in the left lane if you're passing. Here in the United States, people are slow in the fast lane and slow in the slow lane. So I don't know if this is just a preference that Fred has or if this is some sort of law. Like here, I don't think it would be that big of a deal in Arizona, but again, I'm not that familiar with Canada and their road systems. I have driven in Canada. It was like 30 years ago. So another intervention that he listed was he was coming up to a flashing green light and the car was hesitating too long, didn't know what to do, or it wasn't clear if the car knew what to do. And he was holding up traffic, so he pushed on the accelerator so that the car would go through the intersection. That makes sense. I've kind of had stuff like that happen before where the car was hesitant. So that totally makes sense to me. Didn't apparently disengage the autopilot system or the full self-driving system. It was just an intervention. Now let's go through the actual disengagements. He said he had 5 disengagements over 200 miles, and he claimed some of those were dangerous. So an example of a non-dangerous disengagement was there was sun glare on the cameras and it disengaged because the car didn't know what to do. That seems like actually a safety disengagement. But in one instance, Fred felt like the car was going to run a red light. Now, he wasn't sure if it was going to run a red light or not because the car doesn't give you any indication that it's going to stop for that red light. It gives you an indication that it sees the red light, but it doesn't tell you it's going to stop. And he makes this very clear that at one point in time through FSD, the car would decelerate a little bit sooner when approaching a stoplight. But now it maintains a higher speed for longer and is more aggressive in braking when it comes to that stop. And I've experienced this recently too. Like I said, I got the full self-driving trial, and I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. So I have experienced that same thing or something similar, I guess, with FSD and my car, which has hardware 3. So I understand why as you're barreling up towards a red light and the car is not indicating that it's going to stop, that you would actually put the brake on and make sure that you're not going to run through that red light and hurt yourself or somebody else. So that makes total sense to me. But all in all, 5 disengagements in 200 miles. I'm going to talk about my own story. I had 3 in the 30 some miles that I had to drive to work. So it doesn't seem that bad. It seems pretty good, other than, possibly running a red light. And then let's talk about the good. Fred says the car feels more natural when it comes to merging and lane changes and roundabouts and giving, in one instance, it gave the pedestrians the right of way. So it stopped the car so pedestrians could cross the street. That's great. And he said it was better at dealing with intersections. He also said there was notable improvement with city driving, and I would say similar to my experience. But he did say that there is a scary part of his full self-driving experience, and that is that it can build complacency, which is what the AMCI testing, that's what they said as well, is that it can build complacency because it's really good at a lot of things, but it's not so good at those edge cases. So if the person responsible for the vehicle, the person in the driver's seat, isn't paying attention and you come up against one of those edge cases, you could get in an accident, and hopefully nobody gets hurt. You could get hurt yourself. You could hurt somebody else. You could die. You could kill somebody. So that complacency in Fred's mind is dangerous. I will say, and Fred does acknowledge this, that the driver monitor system, the camera that's looking at you while you're driving, does a decent job of making sure you're paying attention. I will say one of the things that does kind of irritate me about that feature or annoy me is if I'm looking off, like, I don't think that the mirrors on the Tesla are all that great. Okay. I think they're terrible, to be honest with you. That feels like there's a ton of different blind spots. I do like the fact that there's a camera and I use the mirror plus the camera, and I think that does a good job. But when you're in full self-driving mode, I don't want to turn on my blinker because I don't know if there's a car in that left lane or that right lane. So I'll look and I'll make sure, and I make sure to look multiple times before I make a lane change, because I have been surprised before, especially here in Phoenix, that a car happened to be there, and so I'm a little paranoid about that. And when I'm looking to that right mirror specifically, the car will say, "Hey, pay attention." And they'll give you the little alert, "Pay attention, pay attention." And I am paying attention. I'm just making sure before I make a request to change lanes that there's nobody there. Now, I understand that the car is not supposed to go into that lane if there is somebody there, but I still like to make sure. So yeah, but it does that monitoring system does a pretty good job. Um, So we've talked a little bit about full self-driving. Let's talk about some other concerns about unleashing cybercabs on the world. Some folks are worried that releasing all these cybercabs at scale would be very dangerous, and we're at least a decade away from a self-driving taxi service. Now, that second part might be true. The first part, I'm not so sure. Waymo and GM Cruise, and GM Cruise is not a good example, but Waymo and GM Cruise are self-driving taxi services. If Tesla had to fall in the footsteps of these two companies, then this is kind of how the process would go. First, they're going to be operated in, testing in geofenced areas with a trained driver, and they're going to be doing this for a while. No passengers, trained driver, making sure that the system operates the way that they said it is. And, they might even have specific hours that they're able to operate. They may not be able to operate between, let's say, 5 and 7 or 3 and 7 here in Phoenix, because that's the busy time and they don't want, self-driving Teslas clogging up the roads, even though there's a driver there. The second phase would be, you keep the driver, you keep the geofenced area, but you add passengers to this. So Tesla can start charging for, moving people from point A to point B, as long as it's within this geofenced area. And then it goes to the third phase, which is, you're still in the same geofenced area that you've proven that you can operate in safely. There's no driver, but there's also no passengers. And you have to, test out for a while. And then you'll move on to the fourth phase, which is no drivers, geofenced area. You're still in that geofenced area. And now you have passengers. And then it's just going to be rinse and repeat for different areas that you want to operate in. Like, I don't think, and we're going to talk about regulations here in a moment, but I don't think regulators are going to be like, "Oh, go nuts, drive wherever you want, you're good." I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to have to follow the same path that GM Cruise and Waymo are currently following. And, GM Cruise had some setbacks for sure, but just because Tesla has really good marketing around their full self-driving does not equal the data that regulators want to see before they just completely release you. But in that same way, it also doesn't mean that these vehicles have to be perfect. They just need to demonstrate that they can operate safely on roads. That's it. Like, though, if they were perfect, there would be no reason to test them. But they're not perfect, and this is how these companies learn what those edge cases look like. And, if they screw up like GM did, then they should be held accountable. In a lot of ways, I am more worried about a 16-year-old driver, a brand new 16-year-old driver driving around my neighborhood than I am about a Waymo van, which also drives around my neighborhood. Like, there was a Waymo van in front of my house just today. picking somebody up, one of the neighbors up. Like my friends, they use Waymo vans all the time. They have 2 cars. They could easily take a car to where they want to go, but they're just like they think the technology's cool. And, if they go out to dinner or whatever, they want to have a drink, they want to be able to safely ride home and not have to leave their car somewhere. And Waymo is a good option for them. My oldest is 28 years old. When she lived in downtown Phoenix, she used Waymo vans all the time. She has a car and she doesn't even drink that much. She just used them because they were really convenient and she doesn't like driving. So, um, but anyway, back to, satisfying regulators, they just need to prove that they can operate safely on these roads. It's a very simplified idea, but they have to prove a bunch of stuff to regulators. And we're going to kind of go through some of that right now. So right now, laws and regulations in the US are not really conducive to Tesla's robo-taxi timeline, unless there's some major reforms in a very short period of time, which would take an act of Congress. And that's not like that's never going to happen. That would take an act of Congress. No, it actually needs an act of Congress to change these rules and laws. To further that point, if Tesla wants to remove the steering wheel and pedals and go total no driver, then they will have to obtain approval from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. And the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration only allows 2,500 autonomous vehicles per year on a temporary exemption. So this is not, that's not a lot. That's not a lot. You might be saying to yourself, well, is there 2,500 new autonomous vehicles per year operating in the United States? I have no idea, but right now we have 3 companies that want to do it: GM, Waymo, and Tesla. And Volvo's looking to enter the market as well to test their system. And Mercedes is doing some level 3 testing, although I don't think that qualifies under this particular exemption. But yeah, there's there 2,500 may have been a lot a couple of years ago, but it's quickly becoming probably not enough in terms of autonomous vehicle testing. If it's only 2,500 a year, it's not a lot. So we talked a little bit about federal law. Let's move on to state law and regulations. First of all, no 2 states are the same. I think Tesla said that they were going to start testing CyberCab in California and Texas. Texas has a pretty loose set of rules and laws when it comes to autonomous taxi services, and when I say loose, I'm not implying that they're unsafe, but they're not as stringent as California's, for instance. So being able to satisfy 50 different states and 50 different laws seems like a challenge, if I'm being honest with you. And there's really no uniformity in the laws between the different states and the federal government. So this is going to be challenging, and we're pretty far away from what Elon said at the WeRobot event, which is, this is Elon's direct quote: "We'll move from supervised full self-driving to unsupervised full self-driving, where you can fall asleep and wake up at your destination." That's what he said at the event. I don't think we're there. There's going to need to be a lot more convincing data given to regulators. And by the way, testing and the data does not include Tesla fanboys who own stock in the company and have a financial interest in showing you the videos on YouTube or X that full self-driving works nearly perfectly. That's not like, I watch those videos too. It's not a representation of what the system can do. It is what those YouTubers and, quite frankly, Tesla did this too, what they want you to see. A 20-minute video showing a flawless full self-driving trip is statistically insignificant, according to Phil Koopman, a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. Like, they need to have good data, and I believe that they will have good data. Tesla is, full of data scientists. I want to stop here. I don't want to give the um I don't want to give the impression that I don't think this is possible. I just think it's hard. Waymo's been operating in my area for a really long time, and they recently had an issue where the car didn't know what to do in a construction zone, and it was big news. And you know what the car did? It drove into a parking lot and just stopped because it didn't know what to do, which is what it should do, to be honest with you. It's the safest thing. If it doesn't know what to do, rather than continuing on and learning as it goes and hurting somebody, it drove into a parking lot when it was safe and it just pulled over. So I don't think that this is impossible. I just think that the way that it is presented by Elon, and I'm not even going to say by Tesla because this is all Elon, it's not as easy as he's making it sound. He's making it sound like the cars, the regulator is going to flip a switch and the car's going to be able to drive wherever they want without a driver. I don't think that's going to happen. And to kind of further that point of things that are going to give regulators pause, there are a ton of different investigations that the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration is doing into different parts of full self-driving. Most recently, there is an investigation over a few different collisions when visibility has been reduced. And these collisions resulted in one pedestrian fatality and one reported injury. So, according to the article, reduced visibility includes sun glare, which is one of the issues that Fred Lambert had, airborne dust, and I didn't write it down, but I think fog was the third one. But I would imagine rain, snow, anything that interferes with the visibility of the cameras would fall under that definition. So I'm going to read this as it was written from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. Here we go. The ability of FSD's engineering controls to detect and respond to reduced roadway visibility conditions. Whether any or other similar FSD crashes have occurred in reduced roadway visibility conditions, and if so, the contributing circumstances for these crashes. This is what they're investigating. Any updates or modifications from Tesla to the FSD system that may affect the performance of FSD in reduced roadway visibility conditions. In particular, this review will assess the timing, purpose, and capabilities of such updates, as well as Tesla's assessment of their safety impact. The probe is actually covering 2.4 million Teslas, which include the Cybertruck, Model 3, years 2017 to 2024, Model Y, years 2020 to 2024, Model S and X, 2016 to 2024. So according to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration Office of Defects Investigation, Tesla has labeled full self-driving as a partial driving autonomous system, or level 2. And I'm going to read this again as it is written. The Office of Defects Investigation has identified 4 standing general order reports in which Tesla vehicles experienced a crash after entering an area of reduced roadway visibility conditions with FSD Beta, FSD Supervised, or collectively FSD engaged. In these crashes, the reduced roadway visibility arose from conditions such as sun glare, fog, airborne dust. In one of these crashes, the Tesla vehicle fatally struck a pedestrian, and one additional crash in these conditions involved a reported injury, stated the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. So, yeah, I mean, it's, if they have to approve you removing your pedals and steering wheel and going no driver, they have an awful lot of data showing that, there could be concern. I'm not saying there is. The investigation is not to prove guilt. The investigation is to find out whether or not there is an issue and let's correct it, right? It's not a gotcha type system as far as I can tell anyway. It's more of a, hey, if there's some area lacking in this, let's correct it and make sure it doesn't happen again, right? I'm sure that there might be fines or penalties or whatever that come along with this, but the goal is to keep everybody on the road safe. It's not to be some um, stick to beat companies over the head with. It's truly there, as best as I can tell anyway, as long as I've been doing this podcast, to make sure that automakers are, one, following the rules, and two, on these like weird cases that we're not super familiar with, like full self-driving or autonomous driving. uh, if there are mistakes made or holes in the system, we correct them, and I think that's reasonable. All right, I have been talking for 46 minutes at this point. So what I'd like to do, if I could, is take the last 3 or 4 minutes here, and it might even not even be that long, and just tell you about my experience with full self-driving trial. Again, I didn't buy it, so this is just a 30-day trial or however long Tesla decides to let me use it. I got it last Friday, so I decided to test it out first thing. I pull out of my driveway onto the road. I engage full self-driving, and there's like, I don't know, 700-800 feet of road, and then there's a right turn where I live. So the car is going. One of the things that I don't love about full self-driving is the speed limit is technically 25, and it gets to 25 very fast. And when you make that right turn, it was wanting to keep speed at 25. And at that particular corner, there are young kids. So I'm usually pretty slow in that driving that direction because I don't want to hit anybody. So, but I'm letting the car do its thing. I don't see the kids anywhere. And it's a school day, and I know that they go to school earlier than when I was driving, so I felt comfortable. But when I came up on that corner, there was a man and his dog standing in the middle of the road. For what reason, I don't know. There's sidewalks on both sides, but he was standing in the middle of the road. I disengaged immediately because I didn't want to hurt the man or the dog, for that matter. And I didn't trust that full self-driving was going to not hit them because it didn't seem like it was going to make any. It wasn't breaking, and I wasn't particularly close to them, but I also didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable and let the car do whatever it was going to do. That just didn't seem like a good idea. So I disengaged. And then I was getting on the freeway, and there were construction cones. FSD navigated through these construction cones just fine, but I thought it was a little bit too fast. Like technically the speed limit was whatever it was, 45, 35 through the construction zones. And it was just kind of weaving through. I wouldn't say weaving. I had to get in the far left lane so I can get on the freeway. So it went through the construction cones to get me into the far left lane. It was, it was, it could have been more intentional and slower. It didn't need to be that fast, a little bit more cautious, when cones are around. Um, but I didn't disengage at that time. I just was a little uncomfortable with the speed and aggressiveness. And I have the car on chill mode. So I was a little, just a little bit concerned with the aggressiveness there. I wouldn't have done that if it was me. And then I needed to transition from one freeway to another, right? And there is a line of cars that goes back miles and miles and miles. And I'm letting full self-driving do its thing, but there are people waiting for miles to get on this transition. And I was within half a mile, and the car did not seem like it was going to try and get into this lane. And I had a meeting I had to go to, so I went ahead and there was an opportunity. I disengaged and I slid into a spot, probably much to the frustration of everybody behind me. But I slid into a spot and I was able to make the transition, and then I turned it back on, and it did fine through most of the driving to the other stuff that I needed to do that day. It still won't change lanes into or out of the HOV lane, because in Arizona, I don't know how it is everywhere else, but in Arizona, it's a solid white line, and it sees that solid white line, and it will not make that transition, and that's fine. I'll disengage for that. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. Much better than the last time I had it, and I did not experience a lot of the concerns that I brought up the last time. And I won't go into those now because we are now 15 minutes into this podcast. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with full self-driving. Would I trust it implicitly? Absolutely not. Obviously, I think I've demonstrated that. But for most of the time I was driving it, I was quite impressed with it. All right, everybody, that is it for me. I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Our next episode will be Tesla's 2024 Q3 earnings call, and that is actually happening tomorrow. So probably be an immediate episode right after this. And by the way, I was trying to clear out my news queue. There's too much news coming in. That's not going to happen. So we're going back to 2 episodes a week, maybe 3, because Tesla's earnings call is kind of an easier episode for me to do. We'll see. 2 for sure. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. If you need to email me, it's Bodie, BODIE at 918digital.com. You can find me on Twitter at 918digital. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you sometime before Friday.